Let's just jump straight into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're exploring a completely fascinating literary critique of state-sponsored psychological oppression. But to really grasp the heavy weight of this text, we can't just look at it from the outside. So today, I'm taking on the mantle of the narrator himself. Step into the shadows with me, the Bard Knight, the High Priest of Memory, as I confess the crumbling secrets of our kingdom's darkest masonry. We're going to see exactly how an empire built entirely on fear actually begins to fracture. Let me tell you about the exact day our arrogant certainty finally broke. See, for centuries, our state possessed absolute psychological control. We dictated the thoughts, the fears, the very memories of our subjects. But then, that control dissolved into a suffocating mist. It didn't happen with some massive army at the gates. No, it happened from within. It all started when the scent of ancient dust rose from the skeletal belly of the earth, creeping across the polished floors of the royal halls and exposing the raw, jagged architectural bones of our kingdom. We Inquisitor Knights, we were the ones who maintained this grand illusion of a pristine kingdom. On the surface, it was all gold leaf and velvet, just a glittering facade of unquestioned authority and order. But beneath all that opulent surface lay the inescapable structural reality of both the state and the human mind. The real foundation wasn't made of marble, you guys. It was made of those jagged architectural bones, hidden away where absolutely no one dared to look. Now, to understand our profound failure as knights, you've really got to understand our foundation. Our entire apparatus of psychological oppression was engineered on one thing, and that is historical trauma. The architecture of fear doesn't just, spring up out of nowhere. It's carefully constructed on this foundational layer of buried debris. We're talking about the worthless scraps of slighted lives, systemic historical prejudices, and the biological decay of past failures. We didn't just ignore the past, we weaponized it. It's kind of like a giant puzzle where our fantasy mapped perfectly onto their psychological reality. Our kingdom's literal underworld, these damp catacombs we call the ancestral vaults, served as the repository for repressed history, kept totally safe from what we called the poison of dissent. And the bitter fertilizer that nourished the twisted roots of our status quo, that was made of those systemic prejudices. And those stained blueprints you see, those were the original messy designs of society, the rejected failures that formed the inescapable structure of our control. Section 1. Engineering Psychological Oppression. As the High Priest of Memory, it was my absolute methodical devotion to make sure this trauma remained an active, suffocating tool of oppression. I used 3 incredibly precise, ruthless methods to maintain control. First up, anchoring fear. I used the thorns of the past, basically historical stereotypes, to deeply root fear right into a subject's memory. Second, effective displacement. By striking dissonant psychological chords, I'd summon this suffocating mist of guilt to just dissolve their present reality. And finally, my role as the perverted gardener. I methodically pruned the deadwood of hope. I made sure that if any vibrant branch of potential change dared to grow, it was immediately grafted onto the twisted, rotting roots of our dark past. The absolutely crucial point here is that I ensured this historical trauma wasn't just some fleeting memory. It was a literal, physical burden. The thorns of the past would manifest in the skeletal belly of the earth as a crushing physical weight against the lungs of our subjects. We immobilized the dreamer. We forced their superego into a state of total stone silence by making them confront the heavy masonry of their own repressed failures. It was a perfect system, right up until it wasn't. Moving on to Section 2. The king's crumbling authority. So the turning point arrives the day the heavy iron doors of our grand hall swing open. I look up and I see our king sitting upon a throne that suddenly felt way more like a cage. Observing from the shifting shadows, I watched as the state's enforcers simply lost their absolute control to this new, shifting chaos. The Jester Knight, usually so vibrant in his motley, stood completely silent. His bells were muted because, he had no narcissistic trap left to set for this new reality. Beside the king, the High Inquisitor's heart, which was this fortress built of walls of exclusion and fear, was physically trembling with dread. The scent of bitter fertilizer and ancient dust filled the room. And the king, he just leaned forward, his ornate jewelry jingling with the metallic, mocking rhythm of a condemned man. Then came the Shadow Knight. Now, he was the architect of our permanent tomb, but he walked toward the dais with this incredibly heavy, deeply uncertain tread. He clutched his hidden trowel like it was a completely useless relic, just warring with himself. You could actually see the internal struggle tearing him apart as he brought the very instrument of our undoing right to the foot of the throne. He presented a forbidden, tattered ledger. I'll never forget his voice, scraping like stone against stone as he spoke to me. He said, "Greetings, my high priest. We bring you a design that mocks our masonry and promises a structural conclusion we never dared to imagine." What he handed over was this rough sketch of chaotic becoming. I looked at him, and honestly, his eyes betrayed a terror I had literally never witnessed. He whispered to me, "It changes, High Priest. The ink, it shifts, it refuses our lines." This ledger absolutely refused to follow our rigid, stained blueprints. It was alive. So looking upon this tattered ledger, this impossibly vibrant branch of thought, I had to wonder, was this the end of our darkest masonry? Could our heavy stone walls, our ancestral vaults, truly entomb an idea that refused to stay still? The doubt in that room was thicker than the suffocating mist of guilt I had spent my entire life summoning. Section 3. The Inquisitor's Turning Point. But the true shift, the moment the architecture of fear permanently cracked, that didn't happen with the Shadow Knight. It happened with our High Inquisitor. Remember, his heart was a literal fortress of exclusion. Yet I watched, completely paralyzed, as he reached out a trembling finger and actually touched the poison of dissent. He physically traced the shifting ink of the tattered ledger. The walls of exclusion he had built over a lifetime just vanished. His venomous grudge faltered in the face of this chaotic, messy design. In that shifting ink, the High Inquisitor felt something we had completely eradicated from the kingdom. He felt the undeniable, creative spark of imagination. It was a spark that dared to imagine a world as it could be. It entirely mocked the permanent tomb we had spent our lives meticulously forging. It bypassed the heavy masonry and spoke directly to the silenced superego. And really, this is where the regime truly dies. The cold reality of our iron shackles, the state-sponsored oppression, the historical trauma, the stone silence, all of it stood in direct opposition to the chaotic becoming of the world as it could be. The illusion shattered right there in that throne room. The cold reality of our state simply could not stand against the raw, uncontainable power of human potential. Section 4. Uncontainable Fire of Imagination. That was the exact moment I, the Bard Knight, knew our state had failed. The bitter fertilizer of the past just wasn't enough to poison the future anymore. What you really should take away from this literary deep dive is how the architecture of fear always fractures. Always. The state tries to preserve itself by burying a dreamer's heroic silhouette beneath heavy masonry, but the fire of imagination just dissolves it. The heroic silhouette refuses to remain buried in those ancestral vaults, and our stained, rigid blueprints simply cannot contain the messy, beautiful reality of chaotic becoming. So I leave you with this final confession from the shadows of a fallen kingdom. We built our power on the jagged architectural bones of the past, hoping to trap the human spirit in stone silence. But I have to ask you this. Once the vibrant fire of imagination catches in the damp, repressed ancestral vaults of the mind, can any architecture of fear, no matter how heavy the masonry, truly contain it? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating text with me in today's Explainer. Keep questioning the foundations, and definitely keep seeking the world as it could be.